Ecuadorian judge orders preventive detention for a prominent member of former President Correa's political party. Nigerian police saves 300 chained young men from another torture school. Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space, has been laid to rest in Russia. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo and this is From the South. A judge in Ecuador has ordered that the prefect of Pichincha province, Paola Pavon, be held in preventive detention for at least 90 days. Pavon was arrested at dawn on Monday when the police raided her house and hauled her out of bed. The prefect is a prominent member of the Citizens' Revolution Party, led by former President Rafael Correa. The judge also ordered that Pavon's bank accounts be frozen. 3 other members of the same party were also detained on Monday. President Lenin Moreno has repeatedly accused Rafael Correa and his supporters of being behind the huge anti-austerity protests of the last 2 weeks. But indigenous leaders have ridiculed the accusation. Venezuela has condemned the persecution of opposition politicians in Ecuador following the protest. The foreign minister tweeted a communique which rejects what it calls a strategy of criminalizing dissent in the brother country. It says the jailing of social and political leaders is a clear attempt to divert attention from the defeat of the government's IMF policies by the Ecuadorian people in the streets. Indigenous movements in Venezuela have taken to the streets to express their support for the victory of the people in Ecuador. They congratulated the indigenous and other protesters for their resistance over more than 10 days and celebrated the withdrawal of the IMF price rises. On Monday evening, President Lenin Moreno finally repealed Decree 883. As a result, prices for regular fuel and diesel have gone back down at all service stations. Decree 883 sparked massive popular protests across Ecuador for nearly 2 weeks as it removed state subsidies for fuel, leading to increased bus fares and price rises for many basic necessities.
Expenses went up, and apart from that, maintenance costs went up. Oils, all of this started going up. So for us, going back to the previous price is very satisfactory.
I would say that this should be increased gradually, because at some point the government has to end that subsidy, because truly, the country does need money to enter the fiscal coffers.
Following the repeal of Decree 883, President Moreno has replaced 2 top military chiefs. No reason was given for dismissing the head of the Joint High Command, Roque Moreira, and the commander of the Army's ground forces, Javier Pérez Rodriguez. However, the president thanked them both for their services. After almost 2 weeks of massive protests, the people of Ecuador achieved a huge victory against the government's neoliberal measures. Let's take a closer look at the events that led to the historic event.
On the 10th day of demonstrations, the situation flared up as repression from Lenin Moreno's government sharply increased. This day was marked by the image of a young protester collapsing after being hit by a projectile. Indigenous and popular movements, firm in the request that Moreno repeal Decree 883, announced their willingness to hold talks. The government, on the other side, ordered an immediate curfew and the militarization of Quito, with only 30 minutes notice for citizens.
I've ordered the Joint Command of the Armed Forces to immediately start the necessary measures and operations. We will re-establish order across Ecuador, and I've also ordered the armed forces to enforce a curfew in the capital city, Quito.
Parts of Quito were covered by large clouds of smoke stemming from the large quantities of tear gas used by the police and by fires started by protesters to conceal their numbers from helicopters. On Sunday, a possible end to the crisis was at the horizon. After a long wait, all TV stations went live to a dialogue table between indigenous leaders and the president.
Mr. President, it is clear that the right wing is controlling the country, along with the International Monetary Fund.
We do not want to affect the poorest citizens. We want these resources to reach their pockets. We hope to invest the money from the subsidies into large projects. but also medium-sized and small projects to develop the fields.
11 days of social pressure on the streets, added to the firm position shown by indigenous and popular movements, forced the government of Lenín Moreno to step back.
We want the Ecuadorian state to answer to the needs of our various peoples and nationalities. We speak of a plurinational state. We are a part of the state, but we are not consulted about these issues. It hurt us when we are shamed for being indigenous people and campesinos, when we are ignored for being poor. It saddens me that you have to talk about poverty when the indigenous people are the ones who plow the fields and feed the city. We have come with one goal, Mr. President. We ask for the repeal of Decree 883 because we are being affected, we are being attacked.
I'm really worried that the decisions we took are being seen as if they were designed to hurt the poor, to hurt the most vulnerable. That is why I want to reiterate that we hope that together we can analyze and reach conclusions for a new decree that replaces the previous one.
The announcement of a new decree had immediate reactions. A celebration for the people's victory couldn't wait. Although there is still a long road ahead, the result reflects the power of the people against the wishes of neoliberal institutions like the IMF.
In Bolivia, President and candidate for re-election Evo Morales has said he has evidence of a coup being prepared in the event that he is re-elected on October 20th.
I have recordings of some of the so-called civic committees of Cochabamba and La Paz, along with some former military officers and members of the Santa Cruz Civic Committee. I have the recordings. They say they want to burn down the House of the People and intend to execute a coup if Evo wins. Once the election observers arrive from the Organization of American States, from Europe, we will be able to provide all the corresponding information to show how the right wing conspires against democracy, how the right wing conspires against the Bolivian people. That is why I'm explaining what happened in Potosí. It's the kind of paramilitarism seen in the previous era of the dictatorship.
Let's hear from our correspondent in La Paz, Freddy Morales, about these allegations and the upcoming election.
Electoral campaigns are set to close on Wednesday, as Bolivia's opposition is trying to unite their 8 candidates in order to force a runoff vote. They're doing so by calling on candidates to support whoever ends up in second place, so that their chances against President Evo Morales improve. Still, opinion polls give President Morales an advantage of more than 10 points. If Sunday's vote follows this trend, then Morales will be re-elected in the first round, as the law states that for a candidate to win the presidency, they must get either 50% plus 1 of eligible votes or be 10 or more points ahead of whoever is in second place. With the possibility of Morales winning in the first round, the opposition has been holding rallies known as cabildos, where they have agreed not to recognize Morales' possible re-election and embrace civil disobedience. For his part, President Morales has denounced plans for a coup attempt, citing these cabildos as part of the evidence. He also told a local news channel that he has proof of this conspiracy by social leaders and former members of the military, who allegedly discussed inciting violence if Morales were to win. Morales finally warned he will present this proof to international observers. For its part, the National Electoral Court said that the electoral process is moving on without any problems.
According to a number of international bodies, one of the biggest achievements of President Evo Morales' time in power in Bolivia has been economic stability. Let's find out how this came to be.
Bolivia's economic stability is linked to a single word: nationalization, a process that started in 2006 by taking back the hydrocarbon industry, which strengthened the state.
Between $67 and $74 billion would have stopped entering the Bolivian state coffers. Imagine what could have been done, and with all that money for so long, and look what has been done over the past 12 years, ever since we nationalized the industry.
According to recent studies, a strong state economy has had great social impact, including the creation of 670,000 new jobs and the reduction of poverty from 38% to 15%.
We have spoken to Bolivians over the last few years about what they think of the economy, and many say they now see themselves as part of the middle class. 75% of our population believes they are part of the middle class, and less than 20% say they live in poverty.
Before nationalisation, companies took 82% of oil revenues for themselves. Now it's the other way round, as the state gets that 82% and the companies get 18%. This has consolidated the central bank's reserves, and it is now able to finance large industrial projects.
If we look at the economic history of Bolivia, this whole process is new. Under the neoliberal model that ruled from 1985 until 2005, the central bank did not have a role in our economic development. More so, rules were written to exclude the central bank from this process. That's why the central bank was prohibited from financing the public sector.
International bodies have highlighted Bolivia's economic progress.
When you look at the long-term picture, Bolivia has maintained growth that stands well above the region's average. Bolivia has greatly reduced poverty in a short amount of time. That's not something that happens often around the world.
The economic stability is reflected in the rate for the US dollar, which has stayed around the same level for 8 years, and in inflation rates, which stand at 3% per year. As such, Bolivia's economic model has allowed the country to move forward and prosper.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. At least 14 police officers were killed and 9 others wounded in an ambush by gunmen in the Mexican state of Michoacan on Monday. According to reports, the state police were executing a warrant on the city outskirts when gunmen in armored 4x4 trucks opened fire. The armed men also set 2 patrol cars on fire and left signs with threatening messages directed at the security forces at the scene. The government has condemned the attack and instituted an investigation. A Trinidad-born surgeon practicing in England is being hailed as a hero by many for successfully reconstructing the jaw of a teenage girl following a horse riding accident. Oral and maxillofacial surgeon Ricardo Mohamed Ali, who was also educated in Trinidad and Tobago, performed the meticulous reconstructive work on Emily Eccles when her jaw broke in half back in August. Eccles, who has since fully recovered, explained that her jaw was attached to her body only by a thread of skin and the helmet she was wearing at the time. Doctors described her injury as the worst they've seen outside of a war zone. Her surgeon, Mr. Mohamed Ali, was born in Trinidad and left for England after completing studies at the University of the West Indies. He has been living in the UK for the past 16 years. The polls have closed in Mozambique's general elections and the task of tallying the votes has begun. Electoral officials at various polling centers were busy sorting ballot boxes and counting ballots out loud. While the law allows 15 days for the results to be announced, preliminary results could come as soon as Thursday. The election has been seen as a test for the recent peace deal between the ruling Frelimo party and the main opposition Renamo. Zimbabwe has geared up to roll out countrywide campaign against sanctions imposed by the West. The first march is set to take place towards the end of October in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. This comes after a declaration of October 25th by the Southern African Development Community as Solidarity Day against the sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe, which the government describes as illegal. SADC member states have pledged to conduct various activities in their own countries to resoundingly call for the immediate removal of the embargo.
Which actually has the right to put sanctions on any nation which is deemed a security threat to the whole world is United Nations. United Nations, there has never been a resolution to put sanctions on Zimbabwe. These sanctions are actually being imposed by the Western countries, powerful nations, who are actually using these sanctions as a weapon to strangle the economies of poor nations like Zimbabwe. This is why now SADC heads of states at the 39th summit in Dar es Salaam took it upon themselves that we need to designate a day where all SADC will cry out and say, please remove this albatross which is surrounding the Zimbabwe economy.
Nigerian police have rescued over 300 young men from another Islamic boarding school where they were chained and sexually abused, the second of such operation in a month. Police raided the school in Daura in Katsina State after some students escaped from their dormitories on Sunday. Police said they will look into the identities of the young men and contact their families to return them home. Authorities are still searching for the school's perpetrator and the teachers who managed to escape during the raid. A high rate of drug addiction and lack of rehabilitation facilities in northern Nigeria are forcing parents to enroll their children in informal reformatory Islamic schools where they are often subjected to abuses.
If you do not finish it, they are going to beat you thoroughly. If you vomit, you will eat the food together with the vomit. And when you want to go to bathroom or toilet, you will be naked, bathing, and they will be together, they will be caning you. And when you go to bed, when you want to sleep, you will be laid like bags or like dead bodies, 40 people inside one room.
The Sudanese government and rebels have resumed peace talks. The peace talks, which are being mediated by the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, resumed in the South Sudanese capital, Juba. Delegates from Sudan's Transitional Sovereign Council and representatives from armed groups attended the meeting. Both parties expressed optimism for rebuilding Sudan through peace and reconciliation.
Concluding and reaching peace in Juba would be a huge boost and indeed encouragement to us as we ourselves in South Sudan head towards the deadline, of establishing the revitalized government of national unity.
Today's meeting is also another important development that demonstrates the readiness of Sudanese parties for peace and reconciliation. With all parties committed to peace, the potential for the Sudan to shift its focus and energy towards building a strong economy that will pave the path for a prosperous nation is important.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. There has been a second day of demonstrations and more police repression in Barcelona following the jail sentences handed out to 9 Catalan independence leaders. In the morning, demonstrators blocked Parallel Avenue in the center of the city. Some then marched to the Gran Via for another blockade, but the protest wasn't on the scale of those on Monday, which paralyzed much of Catalonia. The protest began after the Supreme Court in Madrid gave out sentences totaling 100 years. As night fell, the protests in Barcelona grew to 40,000 people, according to the police. The riot squad again charged the demonstrators with batons as they tried to get past barriers around the Spanish government headquarters in the Catalan capital. At least 2 people were arrested. Protesters also faced violent police repression in the city of Girona.
We call for an end to repression, for the release of the political prisoners, for the exiles to be free to return home, for amnesty that should mark an end point for all of those who have suffered reprisals. Dialogue, voting and freedom are always the path to resolving conflicts. Threats, prison and punishment resolve nothing.
From Barcelona, our correspondent Joan Ortiz has the latest on the Catalan protest.
We are in the streets, very close to the offices of the Spanish government delegation in Catalonia. A protest was called here in the afternoon. It was a peaceful sit-down protest, where the demonstrators lit candles in solidarity with the political prisoners. The idea was also the wax from the candles would make it more difficult for traffic to pass. The protest grew in size and brought this part of Barcelona to a halt. Behind me is a group of protesters who have chained themselves to some of the Catalan police. It has been an entirely peaceful demonstration, but we saw ourselves how the police charged the protesters with batons in an attempt to disperse the protest. But we have seen on social media that such repression is not only going on here, but also in other parts of the city. These protests have grown because the 2 million Catalans who favor independence feel that these jail sentences for their leaders are also directed at them.
We thank Joan Ortiz for that report. The ruling party in Scotland is stepping up its campaign for another referendum on independence. The First Minister Nicola Sturgeon told the annual conference of the Scottish National Party that they were winning the case for independence.
The process by which we choose Scotland's future must be capable of actually achieving independence. It must allow majority support to be expressed clearly and unambiguously. It must be legal, and it must have the recognition of the international community. Why? Because our job is not just to deliver a referendum. Conference, our job is to deliver independence. And my call is that the referendum must happen next year, and we are getting ready.
Russia has stepped in to prevent further military confrontation between Ankara and Damascus as the war in Syria continues. Russia announced that its military units were patrolling between Turkish and Syrian forces near the northern Syrian town of Amman Beach. Russia, which is a key ally to the Syrian government, moved in to fill a security vacuum after U.S. troops withdrew from the area. The Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement that Moscow will not allow the current clash to escalate. Police in France have used water cannon and tear gas to disperse protesting firemen in front of the National Assembly. The firemen across the country are demanding for an increase in pay, protection of their pension benefits, and greater respect for their profession. They are also claiming that their profession is increasingly being relied on to fill gaps elsewhere in the public sector, such as aiding rescue efforts in road traffic accidents and medical emergencies. But they are also being called out for non-urgent health problems due to the lack of ambulances and doctors, especially in the countryside. France has taken a step towards allowing lesbian and single women to conceive children through medical help. The lower house of the parliament approved a bill that will allow lesbian couples the right to use medically assisted reproduction methods such as in vitro fertilization, which previously was only allowed for heterosexual couples. Currently in France, lesbian and single women who want to have children have to travel abroad, which they say is discriminatory. After passing the National Assembly, the bill now awaits upper house approval before it becomes a law. Hundreds of people gathered in Russia to pay their respects to a cosmonaut who was the first man to perform a spacewalk. Alexei Leonov, who passed away last week, was laid to rest at a military cemetery in a ceremony attended by Russians from all walks of life, fellow cosmonauts, and government officials. On March 18, 1965, at the age of 30, Leonov made history when he left a spacecraft during the Voskhod 2 mission for a spacewalk that lasted 12 minutes and 9 seconds.
He was an extraordinary person. He did so much that for an ordinary person, it would certainly be enough for eternal recognition. And he did it alone.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.